This is not about politics. It's always been about preserving the integrity of our border and preventing the humanitarian crisis that we are all now witnessing. Democrats are in charge here. They set the agenda. The chairman could have had this hearing on a border crisis in January. He could have had one in February or March or April. Instead, prioritize political hearings like the hearing, like the hearing we first had, Michael Cohen, months and months ago. Think about this. The President made his emergency supplemental request only 2 days after that hearing. We knew even then that it was urgent. Instead of giving a platform to a convicted felon, we could have come here to address the border crisis. Only now the situation has reached the point that Democrats cannot ignore it. They finally decided to acknowledge that there is, in fact, a real crisis on the border. After months of the problem being pointed out and urgent calls for more funding, it wasn't until just before the July 4th recess that the House Democrats finally agreed, after waiting 8 weeks, finally agreed to pass the $4.6 billion supplemental emergency funding bill to provide some of the resources needed at the border. And despite the size and scope of the crisis, even this funding bill was not supported by many of the Democrats, including some testifying today. Once again, they would rather play politics with the border than work on solutions. They've now gone from denying that there is a crisis to accusing those working to stop it, our border agents, of actually creating a culture of cruelty, as some have said. Just yesterday, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee gratuitously and erroneously accused our Border Patrol agents of committing negligent homicide. I was in the hearing when he said it. The reality is that our border agents are working tirelessly on the crisis, which they did not create, and are lacking funding and resources from the very Democrats who are attacking them. You can't vote against funding for a crisis and then, fiscal year 2019, more than 688,000 illegal aliens, including nearly 133,000 in May of 2019 alone, were apprehended between ports of entry along the southwest border, an increase of 80,000 since October of 2018. And while historically most immigrants were single adult males, 72% of all border enforcement actions in the last month were directed to unaccompanied alien children and family units.
Mrs. Hobart Flynn. Oh, and by the way, I have enlisted all of you as my co-conspirators. So you're going to help me legally get away with all of this. So, Mrs. Hobart Flynn, I want to run. If I want to run a campaign that is entirely funded by corporate political action committees, is there anything that legally prevents me from doing that?
No.
Okay, so there's nothing stopping me from being entirely funded by corporate PACs, say from the fossil fuel industry, the healthcare industry, big pharma. I'm entirely 100% lobbyist PAC funded. Okay, so let's say I'm a really, really bad guy, and let's say I have some skeletons in my closet that I need to cover up so that I can get elected. Mr. Smith, is it true that you wrote this article, this opinion piece for the Washington Post entitled, "These payments to women were unseemly, that doesn't mean they were illegal"?
Well, I can't see the piece, but I wrote a piece under that headline in the Post, so I assume that's right.
Okay, great. So, green light for hush money. I can do all sorts of terrible things. It's totally legal right now for me to pay people off. And that is considered speech. That money is considered speech. So I use my special interest dark money funded campaign to pay off folks that I need to pay off and get elected. So now I'm elected, now I'm in. I've got the power to draft, lobby, and shape the laws that govern the United States of America. Fabulous. Now, is there any hard limit that I have, perhaps Mrs. Hobart Flynn, is there any hard limit that I have in terms of what legislation I'm allowed to touch? Are there any limits on the laws that I can write or influence, especially if I'm based on the special interest funds that I accepted to finance my campaign and get me elected in the first place?
There's no limit.
So there's none. So I can be totally funded by oil and gas. I can be totally funded by Big Pharma, come in, write Big Pharma laws, and there's no limits to that whatsoever.
That's right.
Okay, so awesome. Now, Mr. Mirabani, the last thing I want to do is get rich with as little work possible. That's really what I'm trying to do as the bad guy, right? So is there anything preventing me from holding stocks, say, in an oil or gas company, and then writing laws to deregulate that industry and cause, that could potentially cause
amendment rights? You voted to do that even though that citizen had committed no crime, and you voted to allow their rights to be taken in a court proceeding that that citizen doesn't even get to show up to defend themselves. Now today, you're changing the rules to make it easier for you to pursue impeachment of the President of the United States, changing the rules 9 months into the new Congress. First, you vote to take away Americans' firearms, then you vote to impeach the guy they elected president, all in 1 week, actually all in less than 48 hours, in the House Judiciary Committee, the committee that's supposed to protect the rules, supposed to protect constitutional rights, all in less than 48 hours you're doing it. And why are you changing the rules? Why are you changing the rules? The gentlelady from Arizona was right, because nothing else has worked for you. The Michael Cohen hearing was a flop. The John Dean hearing was a flop. And everyone in the country knows the Bob Mueller hearing, they saw it. That was a flop. So let's change the rules in the middle of the game, because we got to find something. We're out to get this. We got to find something. Never forget how this whole thing started. Never forget how this whole thing started. A false accusation about the President of the United States, saying the President coordinated with a foreign country to influence the election. Jim Comey investigated that for 10 months. Guess what? He found nothing. And we know he found nothing because we deposed him, and he told us after 10 months they didn't have a thing. But that didn't stop it. 22 months later, Bob Mueller does a special counsel investigation. He investigates it for 22 months, and what does he tell us? Other members have already said this. He found nothing. No coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia to impact the election. 32 months of investigations, they find nothing. But what do Democrats want to do? What do they want to do now? Change the rules, keep investigating, because we got to find something so we can impeach this president. Maybe the country would be better served. Maybe the constituents we represent would be better served if we actually figured out how the false accusation happened. And the good news is, as I've said before in this committee, the good news is that's exactly what the Attorney General of the United States is doing. And thank God for Bill Barr. That's exactly what he's doing. But you know what? We could do the same thing. We could do the same thing. And a great place to start is right where Mr. Shabbat just said. Why don't we start with the Inspector General, not just any Inspector General, the Inspector General for the Justice Department, which we have jurisdiction over, just issued a report 2 weeks ago, scathing report on the guy who's most responsible for this 3-year saga that our country has had to live through, Jim Comey. Jim Comey, the guy who opened the investigation in July of 2016, Jim Comey, the guy who allowed Peter Strzok to run that investigation after that guy had ran the Clinton investigation,
has been under assault for the last several years, and I would be happy to pursue a course of bipartisan action to collaborate with my colleague across the aisle to see what improvements and what additional provisions we can introduce to shore up the Civil Rights Act. And so I suggest that we could potentially explore that provision. And additionally, when it comes to the impact on folks who have not been incarcerated, I think it's actually quite positive, because one of the things that we know is that one of the number one causes to reduce recidivism and reduce the recommitment of crimes after a person leaves jail is economic opportunity and the extension of employment. And so it helps folks that haven't been incarcerated, because communities in general are less subject to crime when more folks have jobs and more folks have the opportunity to at least get their resume seen by an employer until the very end.
Would the gentlelady yield?
Gentlelady yields.
Yes.
I want to go, this is something that you just said. We have a situation where, you're absolutely right, in a crime-infested area, when you have people either coming out of prison or people with a record, they are saddled with that record until they die. And they are locked out of opportunity over and over and over again. In many instances, they have children. So they're looking for a way to support their children. And they're also looking for a way to support themselves. And basically, they end up in a situation where there's no way out. So if they can't get a job, locked out of certain housing opportunities, locked out of career opportunities, what are they supposed to do? And all of this is doing is saying at least give them an interview